Hey, welcome to the Supper Talk podcast, where we have all of those dinner time conversations that you don't want to have with your family. I'm Chris, and this is my dad, Steve. Today, we're going to solve all of the world's problems by tackling DOGE. Uh, so, obviously, DOGE has been in the news. Everyone has someone who has been impacted. Dad, none of your life is really paid for by the federal government whatsoever. So what's been on your plate the last week? How have you been doing with everything in life?
Well, other than Doge, I'm trying to figure out what's going on with that. This is finals week for me,
Yeah.
so I've got a final exam in Greek. I've got a bunch of papers that are due. So yeah, I'm all stressed out about schoolwork.
That's I still am. I haven't started at all trying to learn Greek, so we're not going to be able to have conversations in it. I've had this entire week has been absolutely insane for me with I'm hiring a new barber and she's going to be starting next week. So I've been updating all of my lease agreements and getting stuff kind of prepared for that. And that's who I'm going to be meeting with later today. And just finished listening to that book on Chernobyl, Midnight at Chernobyl. Now I'm listening to Alexander Karp's new book. He's the I don't know if I've talked to you about this company before, but he's the CEO of Palantir.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
and it's really really interesting. It's called The Technological Republic: Hard Power, Soft Belief, and the Future of the West. And it's got this really interesting perspective of all these billionaires that Trump has surrounded himself with, which I have a lot of distrust towards personally. I think that the left and right argument is stupid. I think it's an up and down argument that people need to be having. Um, but this guy in a company that I invest in and very much believe in, argues that if you look back at our founding fathers, you know, Thomas Jefferson was an inventor. Benjamin Franklin was an inventor. All of our founding fathers were scientists and inventors. And they were the ones that had outside the box ideas to help shape government. And in that spirit, in the last 20 years, all of Silicon Valley that has grown up without knowing war themselves, and like the younger generation that's maybe just about to get into their 30s, they grew up with the conflict of Afghanistan and Iraq being kind of a normal thing. They didn't actually see conflict, so they grew up in privilege, and they created things for consumers. And it was this real shift in American engineering and development of products, where we stopped making things to build up the country that we had done for so many years. And we really started building up all of these video sharing apps that make it so that way your time can be spent really fun and you can have ads just thrown in your face all the time. So he proposes that these companies that have done truly great things and have gone to great extents should be the ones that are helping shape government, because they're the ones that are in the space recognizing the challenges that are ahead. And one of the examples that he talks about is when Zuckerberg was getting grilled by Senate a couple years ago. And nobody knew how the internet worked. And it's like all these baseline questions that bureaucrats don't actually know, and yet they're legislating laws around. So the book's really interesting. I think Palantir is a really, really fantastic company. And it's interesting getting a little bit of perspective on it. But yeah, it's definitely worth reading or listening to if you have the free time.
that sounds interesting. I read a little while back as part of a one of my textbooks, a book called Digital Ecologies of Faith. And the book's premise starts with there's a developmental psychologist, very famous developmental psychologist by the name of Uri Bronfenbrenner. And Bronfenbrenner developed a theory of uh, human ecological development. So there are ecologies within which humans develop. So the self is at the center, and then straight out from the self is people that you interact with every day, and then out from that is people that you interact with on usually like a weekly basis, and so as you get farther and farther out, you interact with these ecologies less and less and less. So, but Bronfenbrenner's theory ended up being the foundation for what is now known as Head Start. So you take children who are disadvantaged in the circumstance of their birth. They're born into poverty. They're born into families where their parents don't have a college degree. So then you look at these concentric circles of ecological development. You're like, okay, well, how can we pour resources into the family to make it more likely that these children that are born disadvantaged don't remain disadvantaged?
So this is actually kind of an interesting segue on how we could go into talking about DOGE, because I think the thing that most people are talking about right now is defunding all of the U.S. aid. And that's a lot of America's soft power of saying, hey, we're going to help you in the hopes that generations down the line, all those seeds will blossom into something where we'll become a trade partner with you. But then I look at the One Road initiative that China's doing, and it's a little bit different how they're injecting benefits into nations. And for some nations that don't have the economic ability of being able to build the highway infrastructure or the port infrastructure where they can actually get themselves out of this hole, China is coming through and saying, hey, we'll bring our people in and we'll build all that stuff. We'll just, kind of front this loan for you, and we'll make that infrastructure happen. So that way you have the infrastructure, and now you can start actually building yourself up afterwards. And it's kind of an interesting take on how Trump has his relationships with these very strongman leaders in the world, and recognizes, okay, you're doing things in a different way than what the American people are used to. And is this potentially a more efficient way of using the money? I think it was last night or this morning, the announcement of the signing of the minerals deal for Ukraine with the U.S. Just got finalized. And it's like way, way, way lower than the $500 billion that he was initially wanting. But that actually seems like a good way of being able to get money back out of this entire situation, because we can invest the infrastructure to get those minerals out, which might not have been something that Ukraine could have done on their own. So now we can both reap the benefits of this trade agreement for some kind of protections, which may or may not be coming in the future.
Yeah, and there's so many, hopeful possibilities. We'll see how they play out. There's a lot of those resources are interestingly in the area where fighting has been occurring in the past few years. So Russia is presumably going to get at least the land that they already hold.
Yeah.
Perhaps they'll get a little bit more than what they currently hold right now, but they're going to get at least that land. So some of those minerals are going to be in land that is controlled by Russia, number one. And then number two, Crimea has tremendous port facilities.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the ways of getting those resources to market is through the ports in Crimea. Um, so I would love to see a peaceful relationship between the United States and Russia. Uh, Russia was a tremendous ally for, at the time it was Soviet Union, but they were a tremendous ally to us during World War II. China was a tremendous ally to the United States during World War II in our fight against the Japanese. Um, so it's just really really interesting to me how in such a short period of time we took two tremendous allies, and those allies have become our fiercest adversaries. And the reason they're our fiercest adversary is because we're supporting the people that they were fighting against in that war. So like uh, the Russians were fighting against the Germans, and now the Germans are our great ally, and the Russians are our adversary. Same thing in the Pacific theater. The Chinese were our ally in a fight against Japan, and now Japan's our big buddy. In spite of that, they did horrible things to us and to everybody in their neighborhood, and we ally with them over China. Just doesn't make any sense to me at all. The world would be a lot better if the United States and China and Russia got along. If those three countries got along and agreed to compete in the marketplace, but not to, get involved in the regional conflicts that both countries are gonna have interests in. I think Russia has tremendous power in the Middle East, and we would do well to quit trying to be the knight in shining armor in the Middle East and just let Russia deal with all those conflicts. Same thing in the Pacific. China has historical and real economic ties to Taiwan. We get computer chips from Taiwan. That's it. That's the only thing that Taiwan matters to us, is they manufacture computer chips. If we knew we were going to have reliable access to computer chips through China, we wouldn't care who was in charge of Taiwan.
And I think that that's one of the reasons why we have so much manufacturing of chips that are coming stateside. So that way we don't necessarily need to worry about the reliance on Taiwan for the thing that they're really, really good at.
Yeah. Especially as we're moving, Microsoft just announced their new chip for quantum computing.
Yeah, and that's going to be available in the next couple of years, and that's gonna be crazy. We have no idea what that's actually going to look like at all, and that's, I think, the craziest part of this is people keep trying to conceptualize, oh, it's going to be so much better. It's going to be like 100 times. No, it's going to be like infinitely more better. We won't be able to comprehend what it can actually do.
Yeah, and and when you start thinking about comparing computer power to human thinking power, our brains work the same way that traditional computer chips work. So every neuron is in one of two states. It's either been fired or it's awaiting to be fired. But it's always it's a 1 or a 0. 1 0 1 0 1 0 1 0.
This gets to be 1 0 and whatever the in between space is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So then you can have more than these
all simultaneously.
Yeah, they just because they are uh, fundamentally have more computing power, they're going to exceed our capacity to think, because that's coming online at the same time that AI technologies, software technologies are going to be becoming very mature at that same time. So, given AI uh, the ability to have hardware that's even better than the human brain, it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
I think what would be a really interesting project that I've never heard anyone talk about whatsoever, because we're all worried about AI taking over us. But if an organization like NASA or SpaceX or Blue Origin or someone who has the capabilities to build the next generation of James Webb Space Telescope that has even more clarity and can reach even further into space, and then just put an onboard computer that's quantum computer capabilities of just exploring and mapping, take pictures, go out further, just study this, autonomously do this from a fixed location that we can measure and really start mapping out what the universe is or what the observable universe is. I think that that would give us such a fascinating understanding of how everything came to be, because you're not needing individuals just going through and saying, okay, look at this point of the sky. Now look at this point of the sky. Now we have all this data and we can have that all on board, and it's just transmitting data back that's live computations of what it's reading out. I think that that would be amazing real-time data. That if people want to occupy Mars, then obviously there's things after that that they need to do. And quantum computing is like the abilities of making star mapping possible.
Yeah, when you consider like uh now we're predominantly just looking in one direction, but you know the same vastness is available in space no matter what direction you look in. It's all so um
That's
and we
not true.
don't
We're
know
not the
which
center of
direction
the universe. There's more this way than there is this way.
way. Yeah, there's it's yeah, I'm again, I've said this many times before, and I'll say it again. There's uh Elliot, your nephew, my grandson, is going to have a very interesting life.
Yes, very much. So let's get into Doge. Let's get into the absolute fuckwit that is Elon Musk.
It's so
So
funny. There's
go ahead.
I I I said this a couple weeks ago. Maybe I said it on an episode, but there's uh I figured that there was an equal chance that Doge was either going to be the beginning of a new way, and a maybe even a better way of the federal government operating. So it could be the beginning of something really, really great, but it could also be the the most destructive thing that has happened to our federal government. And I
I
don't
think
think it's
both of
equal
those can be
chances
true.
anymore.
I think that something new will come out of this. And I think that this is the most destructive thing that's ever happened in the federal government. One of I was having this conversation in the shop with someone, and there's a certain aspect of Elon Musk that I really respect, because there's a documentary on Netflix that kind of covers how SpaceX started and how he really embraces failure and he learns what not to do. And I can tell you from my career, those are the best lessons that I have ever learned. I know what not to do, because when people have told me that I have screwed up, I remember that. Like I can't disappoint people, as many millennials can relate to. Um, so I think it was his third rocket launch, and uh, he was really needing it to go through, and it exploded, but they were able to get just enough information where the fourth launch was, you're either going to go completely bankrupt and this entire venture is going to go away, or you've learned enough from those first couple of explosions that now you're going to make it. And from that, those three explosions, we now have the chopsticks that can, grab a rocket that is stories tall. And there's a lot of value in him learning from exploding things. The way that he came into Twitter, though, is he exploded everything and he forced everyone to work these unreasonable hours. And he didn't necessarily make Twitter better or more profitable. He made Twitter a completely different product. That is, you can't necessarily compare the value of, okay, was this a good decision or is it a bad decision? It's just simply a different decision. It's a different platform that he's using in a very different way than what Jack Dorsey was using it as. And I think that that's kind of what he's doing with the federal government, but just skirting laws left and right and doing it.
Yeah, I don't even think he's even skirting laws. He's just trying to uh, uh, he's just not paying any attention to laws whatsoever. And to a certain extent, I can understand because he's got such unwavering support from the president.
Yeah.
And our current Supreme Court is and I agree with them, but they're very favorable towards the executive. The Article 2 of the Constitution gives all the authority of the executive to a president. So the president doesn't have just like one piece of authority. He doesn't have limited executive authority. He has all the executive authority. However, how the country operates is completely up to the president. And we've never had a president that has exercised that as forcefully as President Trump has in this last month.
And strategically, I was talking about it with one of my buddies. He was just let go from his company about a month ago, and we were talking about the timing of all of this. And I don't like how he's doing this. I don't really approve of the methodology, but I am going to recognize the cunningness in the strategy of doing this so early in the administration and just being so blanketed about it, because you already hear that there's a lot of lawsuits that are coming up against the administration, and there's going to continue being more lawsuits, and there'll continue being more lawsuits. But at the end of the day, there's people that aren't getting paychecks and they're not getting paid, and they're going to still have to pay their rent, pay their mortgage, buy groceries, get their kids into daycare, and do all the things that they need to do. So while the judicial system is about to get flooded with all these lawsuits, and that's just going to delay other cases from being able to be managed, people are still going to have to be able to live their lives. And I really think that what this strategy actually is breaking down the will of people. And like I can go into like this whole deep conspiracy that I have about the United States of come, because it's going to be Canada, United States, and Mexico. And I promise, like this is there's a whole idea with where the tariffs are going. But I think that it's about breaking down people's ability to fight, and really, really making it so that way, okay, well, yeah, we can sue the federal government to get our jobs back, but now I'm already 6 months into a new career. What good is that going to do me now to go back into a job where now I have to start all over again? I don't think that it's going to prevent people from seeking out the help that they're going to need in the time that they're actually needing the help. So once the judicial system gets flooded, people are just going to have to make decisions on what's right for them. And that's going to be a really interesting place for America to be in.
Yeah, and that's one of the concerns that I've had, that now I think we've already done it. It's too late to put this genie back in the bottle. But the one of the ways that the federal government has been able to attract and retain talent um, is through the reliability of their employment. So, people who are very talented people, very, very, highly qualified in terms of their degrees, very, very highly qualified in terms of the breadth of their experience. Um, they, it's like, oh, okay, or am I going to get a job in the private sector, or am I going to go work for the government? Um, there's the financial benefits of working in the private sector are usually much higher. You can make a lot more money working in the private sector than you can working for the government, because the government is kind of limited by their pay structure. But if you get a job with the federal government, you're not concerned that you're just going to go to work and get fired one day by your boss, because they're having a bad day or whatever. And you're going to have vacation benefits, and it's been a good, solid, reliable source of employment, and that's why a lot of federal people have taken those jobs. And
there may be a
now,
bias because you did have a federal job for like 13 years after another military career of 20 years.
yeah, so and that's actually a good point, because obviously I worked in in DHS and there, so I had good reach in terms of the agencies that are part of that. Like in 2009, I worked on the task force that was executing the government response to the H1N1
The swine flu, wasn't it?
epidemic, which people were worried was going to become a pandemic. So we had a whole of government response, the way that we responded to that virus, and through good government response and a whole lot of luck, that pandemic didn't become as catastrophic as the COVID pandemic was. But in doing that, I also worked with a lot of other federal government agencies that I would have never got the ability to work with. And dealing with contracts, when I was working in D.C., I was what's called a COTAR, a contracting officer's technical representative. So I dealt with contracts and contractors. So I understand the way that the government works. And I do not share the view that is now the dominant view, that that government workers are lazy and that they are unwilling to do an honest day's work. That has not been my experience in terms of the majority of the people. Obviously, every organization has bad apples. But my experience is that those are the exception and not the norm. And I don't know. I just don't know how we're going to attract people. I do not know why anyone would want to work for the federal government as opposed to the private sector if there's no job security in that government work. That's been the biggest draw, is job security. Well, that, and believe it or not, and this is just my experience, but my broad experience in a lot of different areas and people that I've worked with, people who work for the government genuinely feel like they are serving the American people in the same way that if you're
It's a civic
working
duty.
for Yeah, if you're working for a company, you're like, oh, I serve our customers. The people who come, that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to do the best job that I possibly can for my customers. The federal government is the exact same way. There's people laugh about the TSA, the security officers that they've got to go through, but they take their job very, very seriously, and uh, they don't want to hold people up, you know. But there's processes that they got to get through in order to make sure that people get to their plane safely. And um, yeah, I've got good. My experience with the federal government workforce is that they're competent, patriotic, good, hardworking people, just like most Americans are in every sector of our economy.
So I don't think that you're wrong in your concern. And I actually think the way that I'm looking at it, you're exactly spot on with what it is they're trying to do. And I think that that's actually the point is, and this is some of the perspective that comes from the book that I'm listening to right now. But the the way that it's being explained to me is that the reduction of government work from itself would require government spending to go towards the private sector. And there was a law that Clinton had put out to try and reduce government spending that you can't, if you're going to be building something new and there's already a component that exists to the market, you're supposed to do your best to get that component from the market that exists before investing money into building that tool. And from what it sounds like, a lot of the savings can be if you were to privatize all of those things that the government needs to do spending on, because the private world, you are going to attract the best and most competent workforce. So if the government really wants to attract the best workforce, they need to look to the private sector for government contracts. So in theory, we were talking about this, I think it was last week, when we were talking about like militia groups and private security. And there's plenty, especially here in Idaho, there's plenty of gung-ho dudes that are willing to do some kind of private security force. And I'm sure that if the money was coming from a government agency to say, hey, here are the standards, and this is how you can perform your civic duty, and you as private citizens have to adhere to these standards for this type of contract, you can now do security at the local Boise airport or something along those lines. I could see it going back to a pre 9/11 era where all the security was privatized. And as long as there were certain standards being met, you could wind up having a little bit of a different experience in Houston, where it's a much larger international hub than you would in like Wichita. And same thing goes for any other kind of contracting that the government needs. If the government wants to spend money on good works, I would imagine that there are plenty of nonprofits that operate similar to U.S. aid that would be able to apply for any type of new spending that would come to whatever's available, whatever this new era of government winds up looking like. But I think that you're correct in the assumption that the federal government won't be providing those jobs, but they will still be on the lookout for that talent, just in a completely different way of approaching it.
Yeah, and that's to a large extent, that's the way that the government operates now, in a whole lot of areas. There's uh, I'll use FEMA as an example.
Okay.
People think that FEMA is supposed to come in and start doing things to respond to a natural disaster.
No, they
But
usually work with local Red Crosses and volunteer organizations.
yeah, they let contracts. That's what they
Yeah.
do. They're it's like they come in and what they've got is they've got an organization that is designed to spend money and to spend money either in dispensing uh, uh, payments directly to people affected, or more commonly by purchasing a whole bunch of trailers, by paying the Red Cross or the Baptist Relief Agency or Samaritan's Purse, whatever, paying for NGOs to do the things that need to be done, and that's common across the workforce. It's like the government does own some buildings, um, but across the country, the vast majority of buildings that the federal government is in are owned by some corporation, and they're leased through the Government Services Agency, the GSA. When I had that role as a COTAR, I had uh, three major contracts that I was overseeing, uh, and so the almost all of the work that was done in those programs was done by by contractors that were part of those contracts.
So then, if if that's how most of it's managed, do you think moving in a direction that creates that as the majority of process, do you think that that could be an improvement?
I think I'm glad you just made me think of something else. There's one of the things that George W. Bush did in his first term is he tried to do that with government workers. So he's like, oh, okay, well, rather than having a government employee that is protected by unions, that has all these labor protections, let's just reduce the number of federal workers and then have contractors come in and just do that work on behalf of the government. So we had, a whole lot of the people that worked in our office were let go, and then we had contractors, and these contractors we called it the pit. So we took the cubicles that people used to work in, and we took out all the walls and just made one humongous,
I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, one humongous cubicle where we had, places for people to sit and a big conference table in the middle, and all the contractors would work in that pit, and it there's a couple things. One, the contracts are actually more expensive
Yeah,
because
because you
you're
still have to pay for a lot of the benefits, but you're paying for all of the wages, the benefits, and then the compensation for the company that's providing you the employees.
Yeah, so like you've got a contractor that's right there, but the company is also paying for a manager, right? So somewhere there's a manager that's taken charge of that employee, but the manager isn't isn't in the same room. They're not right there. You can't. So the person that contractor is working is has got employees strung all over creation, and you'll come in, and there may be a guy who's working on a very important aspect of a particular project, and so you've been throwing all this work towards that one guy, and then you come in and he's like, hey, I just want to let you know, starting next week I'm going to be working for the Treasury Department, and that guy's gone, and now you're like, oh man, at a very critical juncture of the performance aspect of your contract, you're you're trying to train a new person, and then you go through that one time, and then you're like, oh well, now I can't rely on anybody because they might get pulled away. So you're trying to distribute the work across the contractor base so that if one contractor gets pulled out, um, you don't lose everything. But what you lose in that is you lose the one person who knows, hey, I'm working on Boston.
Yeah.
And Boston is that's where I'm at. So that person's got a lot of, and the people from Boston know that this is the person that's working on them. So when they call up, they're like, hey, can I talk to John? Because I'm from Boston and he's working on Boston. So it's just
The
those contractors aren't cheaper.
the whole knowledge of tenure thing is a real issue, and this is one of the things that I talk to my pilot clients about. Is when the shutdown at COVID had originally occurred, and there were a lot of federal workers that were given early retirements. The FAA had allowed early retirements for a lot of air traffic control controllers that were close to retirement anyways, and they just gave them early retirement. So you have all of this generational knowledge that just leaves all at the exact same time. And then there's a hiring gap, and then you wind up having people after the fact start, and they don't have access to any of that generational knowledge whatsoever. There was no overlap. And because of that, there was a significant loss of knowledge of how that industry works, all because of early retirements from one decision. And it's not to say that that's the wrong decision, but now moving forward, air traffic control tower controllers are at a much, much greater disadvantage than they would have been previously. So if, John knows Boston and knows the little specific things about Logan Airport, okay, well, now that information is gone, and you have to wait for the next potential disaster to come up wish I would have known that.
Yeah. But my experiences were that contractors were not cheaper, that the total cost of the contract exceeded the government calls it PC&B, personnel compensation and benefits. So you have to add all that up, all those costs into.
Yeah, it's the total compensation package. It's not just what your hourly rate is. It's your medical, your vision, PTO, it's your sick time, it's any of the trainings that you get that cost the organization money as well. It's more than just I make $18 an hour.
Yeah, so the contractor, the actual person doing the work, is getting paid less than the federal employee. But there's a shadow management. So you've got like a management structure in the government, but they're not under that management structure. So you've got to pay for that. And the contractor's not going to just eat those costs. That's all part of the cost of the contract.
So here's the counter argument that this book is making me think about. The idea of the government going out and, like, obviously there's going to be mandatory services that still need to exist. I think the real question is going to be on the services that are up for debate on whether or not they should continue existing, as well as the areas that are burgeoning technologies that the government doesn't currently have any role partaking in, as well as how do they start discovering those new areas. And one of the things that I think could be really interesting is you see a lot of tech leaders that are getting into this administration more than they were the first time. And one of the things that this book is bringing up is the fact that there's a real shift in movement of understanding how this technology leaders should interact with government leaders of the nations that their companies are based out of, as well as world leaders in general. I think Mark Zuckerberg is a really good example of somebody who very much was listening to the government when they were putting pressure on him to stifle speech during COVID, and now he's much more of an advocate of, no, we're going to be First Amendments. We're going to be doing more of what it is that we're allowed to be doing. And the book really promotes and encourages companies to have their own internal organizations that want to do good things for the government. So Facebook could actually have, not necessarily part of Facebook, but Meta could have a military technology and applications arm. And they have one liaison that works with the government and says, hey, we're working on this technology. We think that this is going to make the US armed forces more lethal or more effective because of XYZ. Here's our proof of concept. Is this a contract that you would like to pursue with our employees that we're already working on this technology? Because we're just pursuing ideas. And this is an idea that we came across, and we think that this augmented reality overlay is going to be amazing for soldiers. And it'll be more of those ideas coming to the government as a benefit to the government and saying, do you want to bid on this as a benefit for the overall organization? And in that, you might have a nonprofit who wants to do good works in another nation. They might have a different type of argument coming to the government and saying, this is how we think that this is a benefit to you. And in having it where the private companies are actually creating arms of development and allowing creativity to go in all directions and not just necessarily consumer directions, you could wind up reducing a lot of government spending in the fact that they're not managing all of these different projects. The projects are coming to them.
Yeah, there was a interesting announcement this past month about that, because Microsoft had a contract for providing AR/VR goggles to the military. And it was a big contract, but it's the capabilities of their devices just hasn't grown.
Yeah, it's got another 15, 20 years at least.
Yeah. It hasn't been developing. So there's a newer company, pretty new, called Anduril. And they're making all kinds of weapons. And
I think I've heard of this company. Aren't they the ones that have the smart kamikaze drones that like explode right before impact? Yeah, I've seen these guys. They have some crazy technology.
CEO is this young guy, very young guy. He may even be Gen Z. I mean, he's a very young guy, but and his vision is that the U.S. doesn't need to be fighting wars all around the country, but what we should be doing is supplying the technology that is being used in wars all around the country.
Well, and that's way more practical anyways, because we're moving towards an era where all of the wars are going to be fought with drones, technology, cyber attacks, and ground-based troop-on-troop warfare. That's still going to happen, but it's going to be happening in developing nations and the nations of economic prowess, as it were. They'll be able to fight their battles in their high tower using their robots and drones and computers.
Yeah, it's proxy wars, and it's the Middle East. Israel is waging a war on behalf of the United States, and they're waging a war against forces all across the Middle East, not just in Gaza, but the Palestinians in Gaza, Hamas, Hezbollah. They're fighting a multi-fronted war, but that whole effort is Iran. So Israel is fighting a war with Iran. There's the U.S. is the big Western economic power behind that, and the same thing in Ukraine. Ukraine's doing the fighting, but Ukraine's doing the fighting on behalf of NATO. To get back to the Anduril, they took over the contract for developing those goggles, and they have this technology that they were already working on called mesh. Which yeah, so like your cousin Lizzie, she works in networking for the Air Force, uh, and so the military can't just rely on having an internet. So you can't go into. You've got to bring the internet with you. You've got to have
mesh networks are you can use them at the Olympics, where you have people who are completely inundating all of the local cell phone networks, and that's typically what happens when you have large gatherings of people. Is the bandwidth is so low that you don't have any kind of signal regularity, and it's always going to be failed call or dropped connection. But these mesh networks are just you connected to this other person, and you have your own network of communication. What's interesting is, so I use a mesh network in my house because there's a company called Eero that you can get a mesh network installed, so that way you can have a better wireless connection throughout your house because it's more secure than Wi-Fi. And like here in my office, it's completely wireless, but I'm getting the full gig internet that I get out in the living room right next to my router. And mesh network is already available in consumer products, but the military application of it is so much cooler.
Yeah, there's so I think that is very much particularly in military, because there's defense is the largest discretionary portion of our budget. So I mean, the largest part of our budget is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the HUD, these benefits that by law we have to pay. So there's no there's no way for the executive to like trim the Social Security budget without going through Congress. They've got to go through Congress, and that's intended to be slow. But defense, I mean, we can cut spending here, we can move it around, we can do all kinds of things with our defense budget, and one of the things that I think Andrew is bringing up that is positive in this light is, holy cow, if you go to Lockheed Martin or Boeing and you want them to build a missile program, I mean, it's going to take at least 15 years for the missile to be operational, and then you're going to be paying $100 billion every time you fire the weapons system. And
This
we
is
need to be
one
able to.
software that works for everything uniformly with a user interface that soldiers can use very quickly, and you're only spending a couple $1,000s per unit as opposed to a couple $1,000,000 per unit. So you can have significant deployment in all areas that you have combat, and they're very small and portable. So it's not like you're trying to transport a Humvee. This is one of the interesting things about DOGE that I think actually could do a lot with our defense spending, because there is so much room to be able to look at cheaper alternatives to what we've been traditionally using in technology of warfare.
But that's not what DOGE is doing. You're right that could be what DOGE is doing. And DOGE is trying to make people believe that they're kind of doing that thing. They're like, oh, we've identified $100 billion in contracts and we canceled those contracts. Now, I've canceled contracts, and that's not the way canceling a contract works. You don't just, decide that you're gonna cancel a contract and then end that contract and not have to pay anything more on it.
Well, yeah, that's because your name is not Elon and it's also not Donald. So of course you can't.
Well, yeah, but there's the terms of those contracts are written into the contract.
No,
And
words don't mean anything.
yeah, so if you go to a company and we're like, okay, we're canceling your contract. Okay, that's fine. You can cancel it, but you're obligated to pay for it. And
Yeah.
unless we have not met the performance metrics of that contract, you're right. You were like, oh, all these lawsuits are going to be coming. They're going to get their money. So these phenomenal claims of contract savings that DOGE is claiming, just they're not true. Now there may be some savings. They may have identified contracts that can be shut down, and some of those contracts should be. I mean, there's the Biden administration was were the greatest woke evangelists in the history of the world. I mean, they just started spending money on these really really preposterous programs where we're paying for sex change operations and children of developing nations, and somehow thinking that is giving us some kind of a strategic advantage in those countries. Those
I don't see how you don't see that as a benefit.
yes, there's I mean there in the first place we're talking there's a very small percentage of the target population of those countries that receive those benefits, but they're super expensive benefits where we really get our money's worth is by sacks of flour and wheat and beans and rice
Yeah,
that
and
say,
actual food for hungry people that are needing it. And hey, these are gifts from America.
and right on the
Yeah.
bag it says USAID. Everybody knows, man, we had an earthquake and America sent us all this food. We had a tsunami and America sent us all this food. But this is and so many of these, particularly developing nations, there's the majority of the population doesn't like that idea. I mean, I'll use Uganda as an example. Can we send money to help for those kinds of things in Uganda? Yeah, but Uganda literally has the death penalty for being gay. They're and that's a very popular program. Nobody in Uganda, except for the very few people who that applies to, think that that's a good idea. So we don't get any strategic benefit. We're not winning hearts and minds by spending all that money. So those contracts that and the payments that we're spending to the Taliban. I mean, we're sending huge amounts of money to the Taliban because we think we're claiming that they're good actors and that they're keeping ISIS from reemerging in Afghanistan. That is just not the case.
No, we're just allowing Taliban to get bigger.
Yeah, and we're paying for the brutalization of the Afghani people, of the Afghani women and the children, and it's just a horrible, horrible thing. We shouldn't be spending those monies, but that's just because the last administration was so just like historically inept.
Well, and that's one of the other things is just because if we stop paying, it doesn't change the realities that are in those countries. But now our dollars aren't going towards contributing towards it. And this is kind of the argument that I think a lot of conservative people make when they don't want to see tax dollars go towards Planned Parenthood and have the money directly involved with abortion services. And then Planned Parenthood will say, oh, well, we don't. We use that for payroll. And it's like, yeah, but it's all in the same pot. And like at the end of the day, you have a bank account and you're pulling money from the bank account. So whether or not it's mixed in there or not, it's still happening and we're contributing to it. So I understand the argument that conservatives make on that, which is why I can understand, yeah, if we're trying to win over hearts and minds and we're not winning hearts and minds, okay, well, we're not winning. So we should just put this money back because that's going to happen the way that it's going to happen regardless.
Yeah, and the same goes for countries who are taking advantage of us economically. So they've got all these um, uh, monetary policies, trade policies that are to the detriment of the United States. So we pay more to import their products or to sell our products in their country. We pay more than anybody else, and they expect us to give them just like foreign aid, just like direct cash payments to the government, so that yeah, there's no reason for it. That we're not getting we get no benefit whatsoever. And
So go ahead.
those aspects of DOGE, I think, are could be helpful, but that's not what we're doing. There's there maybe to a certain extent with the USAID funds that we might be getting some benefit out of it, but it's hard to know because DOGE is not sharing correct information and deliberately sharing incorrect information over social media that that is just preposterous. There's
The chaos that Steve Bannon really implemented in the first administration of just have everything come at you from all directions, overwhelm the media, Elon has been able to run with in a different level. And he tweets like 100 times a day. And I just don't understand how to keep up with that guy because it's so overwhelming.
Yeah, and there's I can't remember her name, but there's actually an acting administrator of because it used to be the Digital Services Department, and they just renamed it as DOGE, and that whole thing is there's we talked about AI a couple times, but like Grok is the XAI's
Yeah.
AI program, and I'm like, why on there unless you just want to have an AI that gives smart ass answers.
So
It's
I have a really interesting concept for Grok, and it's trying to understand the person behind it. So if you think of like Sam Altman and OpenAI and what they were doing with trying to make ChatGPT this real beneficial tool that has knowledge and it has things that we have as definitive journalism, books, information that we can have. And this is the collected human library. And that's what its learning was based off of. I look at Elon Musk as a completely different type of individual when it comes to his aspects of entrepreneurship. When he has one idea and it requires an ancillary idea, he creates two companies. And I think Hyperloop's a really, really good example. He had a great idea, but he needed a solution, so he invented the Boring Company. And that was a really good synergy between those two companies. When I look at Grok, I actually start looking into other things that Musk has said and other things that he's doing, specifically with Neuralink. And I think that the more information you understand about human psychology and the way that humans communicate with one another, then you can better map how that communication will happen for the further implementations of what he wants to do with Neuralink. Because the early implementations are all very good and altruistic, and they're very, hey, we've got this guy and he's quadriplegic, but now he can move a computer and he can play video games. And that's awesome. And we're maybe going to be able to learn that having a second Neuralink implant will allow the brain to communicate with the spinal column, and all of that will now allow somebody who has paralysis to have mobility back. But one of the things that he has talked about in the past is the biggest problems with human collective knowledge is latency. And we have a latency based off of the knowledge that you inherently have, and then the knowledge that I need to have in order to be able to, one, be able to have a conversation with you, but two, to be able to actually understand what it is that you're talking to me. So all of us have the exact same capacity in our pocket with our phone, but there's a latency problem with being able to, how quickly can you find that information so you can get up to speed to be able to have this conversation? And as AI has been able to kind of go through and make things faster and faster and faster, all AI learning models have really been learning off of a library of information and not the library of human consciousness. And that's where I think Grok is actually really interesting, is all of Grok is learning off of people on Twitter just spewing what's ever in their mind. And I don't necessarily think that it's a good representation of the human spirit, but it kind of is, because there's a lot of people on Twitter that are trying to overcome the absolute horrible trolls that are on Twitter. So you have both ends of the spectrum. You have absolute depravity hidden by anonymity, and then you have people who are virtue signaling because they have a platform. So to an extent, Grok is an interesting concept of an AI that will be really, really beneficial to Neuralink maybe 30, 50 years down the line. But right now, it's the AI that gives you dick and fart jokes.
Yeah, there's I've been working on a project this term, and part of it is dialogue that is informational versus dialogue that is incarnational. So, an informational dialogue is, I've got information, knowledge that I want to transfer to another person. So I talk about that information. But incarnational dialogue is not to exchange information; it's to exchange the substance of who I am with the substance of who someone else is. So it's more emotional, and it's more an act of a will. So, and that incarnational conversation, there, as a barber, you've got to, I know you recognize this, that, a lot of conversation is, making someone feel heard and making someone feel understood. So if you've got like a ton of information in the back of your mind, and you're just waiting to get that information into that other person, then you're not even listening to what they're saying. You're just preparing your response.
It's kind of interesting about that too is, I don't know if I told you about this, but I had to write an article about the replacing, of the barbers that left the shop and needing to hire somebody new. And I was in an emotional state, and I could not write that whatsoever. So I trained ChatGPT on every blog article I've ever written, and I said, this is the sentiment of how it is that I write. I need you to create a message that I'm not capable of creating right now because I'm just emotionally, and I can't physically do it. And I gave it like the first draft of what I wanted to write. and then I was conveying to it, this is the sentiment that it needs to convey. Like there's more than just the words that I'm putting into this. There is a sentiment that needs to be felt, and here's how that needs to come across. And it was the next iteration of the article that it gave me is exactly what you're telling me. Is like the first version, and it was giving me a lot of information, but that second one, man, that point was driven home. And I even told her, I was like, remember this moving forward. This is what my voice needs to sound like.
Yeah, there's and I kind of use AI a little bit differently because so I try and get AI to give me the informational piece, and then because I'm in school and I'm obligated to write my own work, and I'm not gonna let AI just like write a project for me that I can use. So but I'll take I'll upload the rubric for the assignment, and I'll upload all of the material that I'm supposed to know for that assignment, and um, and then like I'll use a good example of a discussion board. So then I'll take the posting that someone made on their discussion board, and I'll say, using all this information, prepare a response for the following text. And then I put their response. So it'll give me a perfect response to that person's discussion board post that includes all this information that's in all these different books that I need to use in order to, you know, hit every aspect of the rubric. But then I take what it wrote and I translate it into my voice manually. So I'm reading it and I'm writing it the way that I want it to sound, so that it's not an AI's voice, it's my voice. But the AI helps me so much in organizing the response, or the thing that I'm writing, and making sure that I completely cover all of the aspects that I'm supposed to cover in that assignment.
Yeah, I've been using it recently as paralegal services, which has been kind of interesting because I've had two separate documents. I've had a lease agreement and a code of conduct agreement, and I was wanting to consolidate everything into one form and then get it over to my lawyer so that way they could just take a look at it instead of hiring them to do all of this and spending hours and hours and hours and getting billed for all of it. Okay, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want to add this clause. Where would this be good? Okay, now that you have all of the spaces, where is it? Let's reorganize all of these in a way where it makes more logical sense, where I'm going by it point by point as I'm onboarding an employee. And it's kind of interesting how, this is the fascinating thing about AI. And like earlier when we were talking about quantum computing and like how much more capable it is with the human thought, we both use AI completely differently. And I don't think either one of us uses it wrong. And I don't think either one of us is cheating ourselves out of the experience of being able to learn or experience things. That's that. I understand when college professors are telling their students not to use it as a cheater approach. Like, don't just get your answers out of it, get something out of it to make your answers better. Um, but I do think that once we start getting into this era where everybody starts using it in their own little tiny ways, and you start seeing like, oh, he's using it this way, that's kind of cool, that's how that person's using it, that's what's really going to spark the conversation. I did ask so many people in this shop how they use it, and I give them ideas of my prompts all the time, and I'm seeing all these light bulbs just like, oh, I never even thought to use it that way. And it's just kind of fun having this little conversation of how are you using it? And as long as you're not being dumb about it, that's great.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's this superficial conversation that's taken place really broadly, that people are like, oh, well, AI is bad because it makes it it prevents you from thinking or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and in those circles, the discussion is to use AI or not, and the morality in that discussion is always not using AI is moral, and using AI is immoral. And the reality is AI is amoral. No, it doesn't have morality. It's a computer program. The more interesting question is, how do I use this tool, and how do I get benefit out of it? And for me, there's I mean, I'm in school because I want to learn. I'm not in school because I'm just trying to get by, and I want to do
No, you have a
the
constant quest for more information. Bigger, better, stronger, faster, must know.
why on earth would I rob myself of the opportunity to learn
Yeah,
when I'm
stagnating
paying for
sounds
the
lame.
yeah. Yeah, there's and I wanted to say one more thing about the incarnational conversation with regard to Doge. So uh there's the guy who is the new secretary of the VA is a former congressman. He was a congressman just before he got this job. So a former congressman named Doug Collins. And so he's the secretary of VA, and he's been uh making videos a couple times a week and sending those videos out, talking directly to veterans and like talking to his employees. And like this Monday was the day when the majority of employees who were working telework had to come back. So he made a video specifically about that. And then he like went to headquarters and went around, and he was like, "Oh, hey, I haven't met you yet." And he was greeting people who were coming back in, going through the door, making them feel valued. We're so glad that you're back in. We want this to be a positive experience. And he was he was communicating incarnationally with these people that they are valued, and there's that the most important thing that they do is what they do for the veteran, that the veterans are valued. So and and in the videos that he made, he's like he just said, he's like, "Hey, this isn't everybody who's coming in today. We know that we're doing this in phases. Everybody's going to be back in the office by July." So in the VA, he took charge. He told whatever Musk said, "Hey, everybody's got to be in by this past Monday." He just didn't do it. He's like, "These people work for me, not Musk." And and so he's like, "Hey, there's because we've got to give people a chance to, they made their lives around their previous work assignment, so we're not just going to do this in a cruel way." And he's like, "Hey, we understand that some people, because again, the VA hires a lot of veterans, so
So it wouldn't be surprising that someone has actual leadership capabilities.
and take over from Musk because he's not secure enough. I mean, he knows that this is he's a cabinet secretary, but he does not understand the power of a cabinet secretary."
Yeah, and he's been scrutinized so hard from mainstream media, and even like he did a presser like a week or two ago, and he took a drink from his water, and the amount of social media posts that I see, there's like, "Oh, this alcoholic can't even go through a press conference without drinking." And it's like, you guys, shut up. It's so very clearly water.
Yeah, and and I think he's doing a good job at ignoring that stuff. And like people have asked him really bogus questions, and he's like, "I'm not even going to answer your question. Next
Yeah,
person."
it's just really interesting recognizing the media always makes their targets, and I understand. He is pretty young. I look at my age and what I know I'm capable of, and I know I'm capable of a lot of things. I don't think that I would want that much stress where I'm currently at in life. Um, but he seems to be more of a target than anyone else outside of Elon himself. Like Hegseth is more targeted than JD Vance is, which seems really, really odd when you have the number two.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not throwing shade over Hegseth. I think he's doing a fine job as Secretary of Defense. But in a cabinet meeting or in a private meeting with the president, he's not going to be like, "Hey, Musk is chaffing my ass, and I'm just not going to deal with him anymore." But Collins, uh, Collins has served in elected office for a long time,
And
and
he's
he
a veteran
knows that
working for veterans.
yeah, he's a veteran himself, and he knows that if he's a strong voice for the veteran, then the veterans are going to like him. The veteran service organizations are going to like him, and because of that, the congressional representatives are going to like him, and it makes him harder to fire than than a guy like Hegseth. Hegseth would be really easy to fire. Hey, I gave the guy a shot, but it didn't work out. Although I don't think that's the way that Trump operates at all. But I would like to see more of the cabinet secretaries take charge of their own workforces instead of just like, oh, hey, well, we're going to do this downsizing, so I'm going to outsource the downsizing to this to Elon Musk, who just I mean, Musk is a talented guy, but the way that he is doing this downsizing is cruel. It's
Yeah,
just it's mean, it's cruel, um, and it plays to the worst of the worst aspects of society. And you see that on Twitter. I saw a federal employee posted on X that, oh man, I got laid off, and they were lamenting their job. And then all of a sudden, all these people in the comments are just like, well, you've been working on woke programs and you should have been fired a long time ago. And they're just being, yeah, you're like, the humanity of Grok, but that's the kind of the humanity that you see is just people who have they either don't really understand that it's a real person on the other side, or they don't care. They just
I
don't.
have a veteran that comes into the shop. He was a medic. He works at a local hospital, and he's usually one of the more conservative voices that I have a conversation with. And we were talking about the amount of people that are getting let go from their careers. And he looks at me, he's like, I have no sympathy for people that have bureaucratic jobs that shouldn't exist whatsoever. I've worked for the federal government. I don't care about federal employees whatsoever. And like it was this conversation that didn't go anywhere because like where do you go from that? Because I get it, maybe that job shouldn't have existed, but it did, and somebody made their career around it, and they're feeding their kids with that job, and now they can't feed their kids. So in your lack of caring for a bureaucratic organizational decision, there's someone who's now suffering.
Yeah, and one of the challenges with um, uh, I agree with the president that there's a level down to that level. He needs to have political allegiance from senior people in government. So if there's and he learned this from General Milley, from I can't even remember the name of his Secretary of Defense, but
All
he
during his
had
first administration.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's he had people who and they wrote books about it. They were like, we were trying to manage the president. and Milley admitted that he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he was telling the chiefs, "Hey, if you get an order from the president, and I don't want you to do anything on it until you talk with me first." So he had people who were working against him in senior levels of government, trying to thwart the elected leader of the country.
And
That's bad.
I think that that's actually one of the things that created a perception for the left that has had such a long-standing impact. I was talking with a client who had asked me if I would hate a good policy from Trump simply because it came from Trump, or if I would be willing to acknowledge a good thing that came from him after the fact. And I was like, no, I don't like the guy. I don't want to be the person who says like, oh yeah, he did these great things, but I will. I'm okay with being wrong. I'm perfectly fine with being wrong. And I think where the real issue is, growing up with Bush, who suffered from dyslexia and different learning impairments. And he didn't talk very well. He wasn't very eloquent. So growing up, when you see like, oh, there's incompetency in the leader, and then you have 8 years of just this sweet talking guy, and then you go into somebody who doesn't understand politics because they're an outsider, surrounded by people who are trying to make him fail. He seems even worse than the guy you grew up with. And that's what I think a lot of the left is you have the people who are working against Trump in the first administration that make him seem significantly less capable than what he was capable of doing. And I'm not talking about capabilities as in you're pro what he's doing or you're against what he's doing, just the capabilities. And to your point, the allegiance that he has now in the second administration, oh boy, howdy, he has some capability.
Yeah, he's got people in these positions who, for the most part, are loyal to him, and
Yeah.
they're gonna probably stick to their guns. I think that yeah, I don't trust Musk nearly as much as the president does. I mean, he is
That's
a
because you don't have the same kind of money the president has.
yeah, you're right. There may be other reasons behind it, but I'm just saying that Musk is a globalist. He is,
Absolutely he is.
yeah, he is not, and Trump is a nationalist. And there's nothing wrong with being a nationalist. The president of the United States should be a nationalist. He represents our nation, not the world.
But for him to be in bed that closely, whose views do not align with his own, and his putting his finger in every single pie on the planet, it just seems like there's a conflict of interest somewhere.
Yeah, and I'm waiting for, and it's one of those things that where is your will? We've talked about this. I mean, my will for the president is that he succeed, because when the president succeeds, the country succeeds. But my will for Elon Musk is that he just goes away. I think I literally, I hope that nobody pays any attention. So when the Department of Defense and the Justice Department and the FBI, all their directors all say, don't pay any attention to that, don't respond to it. And when guys like Doug Collins doesn't say things like that, but what he does, he just takes over and starts managing his own workforce the way that he wants to manage his workforce. I would like to see way more of that, and way less of Elon Musk, because he is he's just plain a mean person, and he's and and this is the difference between the Republican Party of today and what I would consider traditional conservatism. The Republican Party of today is a populist movement.
Yeah, yeah, and that was something that Steve Bannon was saying during the first administration. Is if you really look at all the world leaders, populism is the thing that it is the train that's coming, and you're either getting on board or you're going to get plowed over. I So I have a thought experiment on Musk and him going away. And I want to get your idea on this. So there's more talk of Occupy Mars, and like that's obviously been his goal. Do you think that it is possible that part of the initiative of DOGE is so that way you can actually have somebody who is looking at a high level of government because they are going to be needing to have that understanding when they go to another planet to form a new government? Because who knows what would happen? Does Elon Musk go to Mars as an American? Does he go to Mars as an Earthling, or does he go to Mars as an explorer and conqueror? Because depending on what one of those options he selects for himself, he might need the understanding of how a world government operates. And in that extent, allowing him this proximity to the role and being able to see literally every aspect of it, and then creating a brand new government from the planet surface up, you could wind up having however that democracy, autocracy, Elonocracy, who could design it however you want it to be. And do you think that there is benefit in that for humanity as a species?
He's already spoken about the type of government he would like to see on Mars.
Okay.
And there's, but before I talk about that, I would just say that I don't think Elon Musk will go to Mars. I don't believe that'll happen.
You mean he's going to let other people die?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
Okay, cool. As long as we're on the same page, that Elon's not going to die for anybody.
Musk has tremendous courage when it comes to the use of capital. So he's willing to lose a lot of money.
I gave Bezos a ton of credit for going on his own rocket. Him and who's the CEO of Virgin?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Like both of those guys being on the Richard Branson.
Yeah.
I was so excited to, and especially Richard Branson, his whole story and his career, like he's an adventurer. That guy's really, really fascinating. Jeff Bezos is Jeff Bezos. But if you're building a rocket ship and you are trying to get off this planet and you don't actually put your money where your mouth is and you're not the first one to be on that ride, fuck you. Like, period. You have that money. You have that capability. You have hired the best people to do it. Take that ride, be number one, experience the thing that so few are going to be able to experience, and like take that win. And I think that Bezos and Bronson took that win and they really, really understood, like, yeah, there's a little bit of risk, but that's where the reward comes in. I would never see Musk doing anything other than sending a really expensive car into space.
Yeah. And that's so. I don't think Musk will ever go to Mars. He's got he would be perfectly willing to blow up an entire rocket full of people and just chalk that up as a learning experience, but he's not willing to be on the rocket that might blow up. But the other thing is when he's talked about government, um, he said that what he would like to see is direct democracy. So some kind of a system to where, you can vote online. Here's the issue. Everybody votes on it, and whatever the majority is wins. And he believes that if you digitalize direct democracy, then the people can make way more decisions than are that's currently being made by bureaucrats. Um, and so that's what he wants. He wants to have a direct democracy where, as much as possible, potholes to planetary protection, all those issues are put up to a vote to the entire population. Everybody votes, and whatever is the majority wins. Um, I think there's a lot of problems with that, and our founders thought of that. It's not that they were completely oblivious to the notion of direct democracy, but but in a direct democracy there are no minority rights, none. The majority rules in everything, and so you could have 50.00001% of the vote, and you win. And the other side, where so it's like 49.999997 or whatever, those people just have to eat cake.
Isn't that the direction that the administration is moving towards meritocracy, though? Is not having those protections and really making it so, okay, if this is the will of the people, this is what we want it to be, and the best is going to come to the top, and we want the absolute best results, no matter what it is.
Except that's not really what's happening. So the people voted for Donald Trump, and now Donald Trump is doing what he believes he was elected to do. But but there's DOGE is a good example. I think most people who voted for Donald Trump agree that the size of the government is too large. We need to reduce the size of the government, and that size is both in terms of people, contracts, properties that are leased. So the whole of government. I don't know. Most people believe that the entirety of government is too big and it needs to be reduced. But most people don't want to be cruel to people when they're going through reduction in force.
And they certainly don't want somebody who's celebrating it at every turn and opportunity. Uh, the whole visual of him with the chainsaw, it's, I was thinking this morning, Mike Judge made a movie over 20 years ago called Idiocracy, and it's basically Futurama. This guy in the military accidentally falls asleep in a time capsule, wakes up 1,000 years later, and basically conveniences one strategy. And like the whole presidential system is Terry Crews as President Camacho, and we're gonna give plants what electrolytes because it's what plants crave. And it's kind of about the stupidity that becomes democracy if you just let conveniences win and you go to the lowest common denominator. And seeing him on stage doing all these theatrics are the exact same kind of theatrics that this movie was talking about 20 years ago, where all you're doing is being cruel and then selling it to the lowest common denominator like it's WWE.
Yeah. There's he's doing the same thing in his approach to reducing the size of government that he did on X, and he continues to do on X. There's is to get, he knows how to gin up the worst in people and make that worst seem like the loudest voice, well, to make the voice, that voice the loudest voice in the room. So I don't believe that the majority of the people in our country would support what Musk is doing.
Mm-mm.
Um, but I
Most of the
think that,
conversations I have are very much like, yeah, this needs to happen, but not like this. And I think that that's the real challenge is there's a lot of agreement on both the left and right. It's just that there's not a lot of solutions that are being offered for, well, here's how I would do this differently. And since there's not any other solutions that are being presented in a way that can actually offer an alternative, this is what we get.
yeah, I had a lot of respect for Elon Musk. I really did. Uh,
Well, I've always thought he's Lex Luthor. It's like you're either Tony Stark or you're Lex Luthor, but you're a billionaire who's doing some shady stuff, and I can't tell if you're Iron Man or not. And it was when he started manipulating the crypto market with Dogecoin. Like while we're on the topic of Doge, I that's when I really started paying attention to crypto. And I had invested in Dogecoin early on, and I flat out told my clients, I don't think this is going anywhere. I think Elon's manipulating people, and I'm gonna take a ride, and I'm gonna see how much money I can make off of it. And I made a couple $1,000s, and I like if you're gonna get involved in crypto, you can lose money. Like you will absolutely lose money if you're not paying attention to it. And I took people's money. But I am paying attention to this guy and he's talking about it at every opportunity. And then he mentions it on Saturday Night Live. And that was my moment where it's like, this has been a long game. You were just really patient and you realize that so many people have the attention span of a goldfish and you're playing the long game. You suck.
yeah, I have nothing but a bad taste in my mouth. It's so funny. I was walking down the street just a couple days ago, and his brother was going past. And every time I see his brother, because his brother, has a restaurant here in town, and the headquarters for his businesses, because he has a restaurant business, but he's also got a drone business where he does drone shows. Uh, so and he's got a book out. He just recently released a cookbook. Um, so every time I go by, I'm like, "Hey, chef, how are you?" There's because it's just a sign of respect that he would appreciate being greeted that way by somebody on the street. But I walked past him the other day, and I just had this bad taste in my mouth. I'm just like walked past him with a scowl on my face because I'm like, oh, there's a there's
I I appreciate that you did that because that there's like some sentiment where he's like, Elon, look, man, the overflow's coming to me already. Just get your shit together.
yeah. And when he was going by, he was on his phone too. So I was like, he's probably talking to his brother, that son of a bitch.
I I very much am. That's the one area that I try really hard to remind people about. I remember in the first administration when people started making fun of Barron Trump, and I was like, you can't make fun of this kid. Like, do not. He has nothing to do with his dad at all. And
Yeah.
I think that during the first administration, Melania was actually really, really smart in making a decision to not be in the limelight and to be more of a mom and kind of protect Barron from everything. I think that was a very, very smart and wise decision on her part.
Yeah,
Now that he's
she's a very, very impressive woman.
she is, and even in her book, the fact that she spoke out against things that her husband did, as little of a dig as that is, the fact that she did that when her husband is who her husband is, kudos to her. Now that Barron's starting to get in more of the limelight and he's making decisions for himself and he's an adult, yeah, fair game, do whatever you want. But for the most part, I've always been of the mentality, the sins of the father are the father. Don't put blame on any of the family members because one person is doing something really, really terrible. And I didn't even know Elon Musk's brother had a restaurant in Boulder, but man, I could definitely feel that sentiment if that guy was walking around me, just like, oh, your bloodline sucks.
Yeah, and I've always had tremendous respect for Kimball Musk as well, because you see, and the drone shows that he's doing, are really spectacular, and they're
And they're not the drone
entertaining.
shows we were talking about from Andril, right?
Very different, very different. These are drones with lights, and they they make
Spectacular lights, not explodey lights.
yeah. There's but it's there and but if you think about it, it that pairs very well with the skill set of a chef, somebody, because the chef is trying to entertain people with their food, and the restaurateur is trying to entertain people with the place and with the atmosphere and with the food. And there's so it's it's that hospitality industry, and so to be able to have people in a stadium. He did a drone show here, and I could see it from my patio. But to have an entire stadium filled with people just mesmerized by these dancing lights in the sky, um, there's it's like, okay, that's a value. That's a value, and it's a value that most people aren't going to be able to pay for, because most people are, when they go out to eat, they're going out to eat at Applebee's. Um, the but for the people that can afford that, it's a good gig. And he's like every year he goes to Burning Man. That's what he does. So every year he goes to Burning Man.
Tracks.
Oh, now that I brought that up, I've
My
got to
brother
say,
does ketamine, and I'm just gonna go to the desert and just see some cool shit.
so in the newspaper, the local newspaper, the Daily Camera here in Boulder, this morning there was an article that Naropa University, the Buddhist university here in town, just got a grant that's going to provide $1.5 million in scholarship funds to people who are taking a psychedelic studies program. So they've got an undergraduate degree, so it's a 4-year degree in psychedelic studies. And I'm like,
And
so
there's
how
grants for this?
Say again?
There's grants for this?
Yeah, so somehow I don't know where the grant came from. This is one of the grants that there's if it comes from the federal government, good night. They need to pull that money back, because how do you compete?
How dare you say that? How dare you? That is not going to be something that we agree on this podcast whatsoever. That is all the federal government should be spending their money on.
Well, I mean, I'm a boomer, man. So like, I told you I was doing
Yeah, so
acid.
you lived through that generation.
And there's my generation is the psychedelic generation. And the idea that there is even a degree in psychedelic studies is that people wouldn't think this, but it is the most boomer idea that you could ever
Absolutely.
possibly.
Paul Stamets is a mycologist that's from Washington, and he's around your age, and he is fascinating, just absolutely fascinating. And he's been on a documentary. There's a book called How to Change Your Mind, and Netflix did a limited series documentary. And basically, the book followed a bunch of different passageways that the author published his studies on psychedelics. And one chapter was on like mescaline, one chapter was on peyote, one chapter was on actually like snorting insane amounts of tobacco. and one was on 5-MeO-DMT with the Sonoran Desert Toad. So like the book is, this is the set and setting, this is the dosage, this was the experience, this is what I had after, this is this chapter on this substance, this substance, this substance. And it's a very, very scientific breakdown of each one of these substances. And then Netflix made this documentary on like 5 of the chapters. And the chapter on psilocybin, they have Paul Stamets come on. And he's just this awesome old guy who loves the world of mycology. And he's done podcasts on Rogan a handful of times. And it's actually the very first Joe Rogan I ever listened to was Paul Stamets last year. And he's talking about how he is a psychonaut because there's people who do normal amounts of psychedelic experiences. There's people that try and do like ego death experiences, and like that's where I've been at. And then there's people that go so far off the charts that when you compare them to the things that I do, you're like, well, Chris isn't that crazy because he's not going all the way off the rails. But he's part of this collective group of psychonauts that are just exploring how far out can we go? Like, how far out, man? And they really, really push the limits of the cerebral space that you can access. So that way they can try and legitimize the research that people can do that helps with depression and PTSD and a lot of mental illnesses that I genuinely think could be solved. And I think that between what Colorado's done with decriminalization and maybe a little bit less of Oregon, some of Oregon, more Colorado, a little Oregon, has done enough in the conversation to let people realize, hey, there's actual studies, there's actual medicine that can be had with this. Like, let's really, really look into it because, man, the night and day difference I had after my experience and being in one of the deepest depressions that I have ever been in, and then just like that light switch was just turned on, and almost a year after, I was so jubilant and happy. And I think that there's a lot of real information that can be had with studies, and even just adding legitimacy to studies that have already been occurring. Ooh, that's exciting.
There was another article in today's paper. This was a trippy morning on the newspaper, but the first permits for psychedelic businesses were issued by the state. So first you have to get a permit from the state, and then you've got to get a license from your local municipality to use it. But it was interesting to read this article because, some of the permits were issued by people who hope to run, psychedelic places where
like treatment facilities.
Yeah, so like you go in and you take some mushrooms and then you stay there and do your trip. That's the way that things in Colorado are going to be. It's not like you're just going to go into a dispensary, buy a bunch of mushrooms, and then leave and go do your trip someplace else. The way that the law works in Colorado is you've got to go buy your products there, and then you got a trip right there. So like being a tripster, that's what the psychedelic degrees, the people who get those degrees are going to be employed in these facilities, facilitating the psychedelic experiences of people inside those facilities. But there was another one of the 7 permits that was issued was for a person who wants to begin a cultivation business. So I'm like, so you would have thought he's got the first license or the first permit from the state to begin growing psychedelic mushrooms on a commercial basis.
Man, I'm so like torn by the concept of that because I very much fall into the world of, I think it's plant-based medicine. I think that if the universe wants to teach you, this is where like I am the most hippie uh, I can possibly be, because I genuinely do believe that it is a magical substance. I genuinely do believe that when the universe wants to teach you something, the universe presents you an opportunity to learn, and it may be a challenging experience, it may be a positive experience, but you're going to be presented an opportunity to learn when the universe presents that opportunity for you. So the circles that I run into, money is never a consideration. It's, hey, I think this would be a blessing on you, and hey, here's this is going on. Hey, I have some extra. Here's this for you. And it's always this communal giving. And the idea of what this guy has, he has a literal money printing factory out of the thing that I don't think you should make money off of.
There's well, and so I'm reading a book now because there is another side to the psychedelic story. So I'm reading a book now called "The Thing That Was Supposed to Make Everything Okay." I think that's the title of the book, and it's about a guy who was what you just termed as a psychonaut. Somebody and this has been my experience as well, because I've done lots of psychedelic. I told you I've done LSD, I've done psilocybin, I've done um, and obviously cannabis. But there's kind of it's a little bit of a carrot on on the stick thing, in that it's always just out. So it's like, man, I had this one psychedelic experience, but what I really want is this next psychedelic experience. So you try a little bit of ketamine. Now you're like, oh man, I've got to go for psilocybin. And you do psilocybin, you're like, oh man, I got to go for DMT. And then you're always looking for the next psychedelic experience to be something that is going to change everything in your life, and it's going to make everything that was bad okay. And that's the name of the book, The Thing That Was Supposed to Make Everything Okay. But what this person came to the realization was that he was just chasing a dream in the ether that you can never catch.
It's you're chasing the dragon's tail, and you're constantly trying to find this. I had this conversation with somebody the other day who, very, very well to do. He's done very well financially in life, and he travels the world pretty regularly. His wife just had their second kid, and he was talking about how he just wanted to have an impromptu trip with his brother, so he booked two tickets to Morocco. And when he comes back, he's getting his hair cut the day after he arrives back in town, and he looks at me and says, I did this trip because I have these two daughters, and I realized that I want to have that feeling I had when I was young and the first time that I left the country, and, experiencing some other culture again. And the first time I had that happen, it was so exciting because I'd seen another culture, and now I've seen so many cultures that it's another culture to me. And I was explaining to him the whole thing that I have against nostalgia. And personally, I think nostalgia is one of the most dangerous drugs that exists. And it can be looked at from any number of things. It can be that thing that you had when you were a kid. It can be that feeling you had when you were first dating somebody. It could be the first high that you had when you tried some new substance, but like you're always thinking of, oh man, I want to have that first time experience. And a couple of years back, I just realized like I'm not going to get that first time experience ever again unless I'm getting a first time experience with something different. And what I was conveying to him is like some of my hobbies. I have so many stupid hobbies, and I don't keep my hobby for a long time, but like let's say shooting, I spend hundreds if not thousands of dollars onto that hobby, and then I get to a certain point where I realize, am I just wanting to have the fun that I used to have when my dad was showing me how to shoot when I was a kid? Am I trying to have that fun that I had when my buddy Daniel took me out to shoot when I was a young adult? Or am I just going to go because I'm going to go? And then instead of spending, $500 on ammo, I spent $500 on buying a sim rig. And then I can just race. But I still spent the money on a hobby. It's still self-care, but I did something new and it was a new experience. And that new experience was a new dragon's tail that I was able to get. And that's one of the interesting things about like psychedelics for me. I do have an interest in kind of going a little bit deeper and seeing how far into that place I can go. But I'm also not. Uh,
Right.
I don't necessarily think that because I've tried cannabis and marijuana that I'm cool with acid. Or that I'm cool with MDMA. And I think that for me, it's not about a nostalgic experience of having the same kind of high that I had last time, but it's very much what what lesson do I need to experience out of this upcoming time? And that's where I think people who look at psychedelics fall into those two categories of, are you doing this recreationally, or do you have a certain reverence towards what this experience is and you're trying to have a revered time out of it?
Yeah, there's and that's what. So there again. I've always had um a a more or less positive view of psychedelics. I think that it's. I think we talked about this one other time. I think that it's smart to not do psychedelics until you're and it's not 21. I think 24, 25
Yeah.
is probably a much better uh, for a couple of reasons. One, I think your brain fully needs to develop before you start changing the way that your brain operates. Um, but then the other piece of it is if you're going to bend reality through a substance, I think it's smart to have a firm grasp on what reality actually is.
Yep. And that's one of the concerns that I have with trip sitters is when I've done my experiences, I have somebody who is very close to me on a personal level because I'm relying on that person to keep me grounded to, hey, what's going on? We have this innate sense of trust. And I know that you were talking about, trip sitters can kind of be like bartenders or they could potentially be like barbers where, they can create a good time. They can make it a more personalized experience for you. But I would argue that they won't necessarily keep you grounded because the things that make it so that way I can provide someone a really, really solid experience is the fact that they came in 5 times before. So that way I can have conversations about with them with the things that are going on in their life. If you have somebody coming into me for the first time and they're like, oh my God, I was touched inappropriately as a child. Whoa, man, we're starting out really heavy, aren't we? And I think that that's going to be a much greater challenge for someone to ground an individual who is in a warped sense of reality.
Yeah, and that's what I think uh, is so Naropa University. It's a Buddhist university here in town, but their most common degree program is in clinical therapy. So they 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 graduate a lot of people who are licensed clinical therapists and do counseling work in a variety of settings. So they've got a
So this would be like a supplemental social work study.
yeah. So
Okay.
they've got a now I don't know what the psychedelic program all entails, but I do know that the university has a very solid body of knowledge with regard to um, how to provide clinical therapy. So they understand things like that. It's like, oh, okay, well now we've got an issue. How are we gonna do with that? And how do you do that in the context of the person is under a hyper uh, um, uh, mental state of some kind. So I think that but the other piece of it is it's not just the person. It's the business and the facility, and so like if you uh, I mean I'll use tattoo parlors as an example. So like if you go into a tattoo parlor that's on a a seedy strip mall, and there's prostitutes on the street right out in the front, and there's liquor stores all over the place, and it's a very very seedy part of town, and you go into the tattoo place and all they have is flash art on the wall, and the guy is sitting there giving a tattoo with no
Poor
gloves
Brad
on, and
got
he's got
his
a
first tattoo in Boise.
exact.
Yeah.
There's so but or then you go into a person where everything is super chill, everything is clean, there's soothing music in the background, there's it's not that there's flash art that's just like commercial, but there's like books
Custom
filled
art that's
with
on the walls. Yeah.
art on the wall, pictures of these beautiful pieces that people have done. Um, well, yeah, there's your level of trust towards the artist is if you're getting a tattoo on your back, you got to. I mean, the dude could literally be writing whatever they want on your back, and you're not gonna know for a
This
while
is
anyway.
why we don't look at my butterfly tramp stamp. I know that it
Yeah.
exists.
the but so I think that's the same thing. I think that if you go into a place and it's soothing and there's like little waterfalls
It'll be like
and
a med spa.
yeah, that's exactly right. Then
Yeah.
I think that people are going to be like, oh, okay, well, this is comfortable. I can feel safe here. I can feel happy here. There's I think that is way different
I'm
than
just imagining like all the Mormon housewives in Utah that are going for their first time. You just hear like this blood curdling scream of someone's psyche just breaking in the back room. And just this nice woman walking in like, hello, I'm here for my appointment.
I had meant to mention this to you. I was walking down Pearl Street 2 days ago, and these two young ladies were walking, towards me, and I passed them. And as I was coming up to them, they were wearing khaki pants and a black polo, and on the black polo they had a name tag. And as I was coming up to them, I'm like, man, they look like Mormon missionaries. So I get up, when we go past each other, and I'm like, they were Mormon missionaries. And I got to tell you, I mean, I've lived in a lot of places where there are, a large percentage of the population, not a large percentage, but a significant percentage of the population is Mormon. And Idaho is certainly one of those places.
Yeah.
But I had never seen female missionaries until this time.
We had Haley is so much nicer than I am. She is so much nicer than I am. And for context, she was raised the youngest of 8. She was raised Mormon. I love her parents. Her parents are fantastic. I have no issues with being raised Mormon. She was married in the church before we got together, and her first wedding was actually in the Salt Lake Temple. And there's definitely a lot of history with the church, and she does not want to be a part of the church anymore. We have reached out to the church on numerous occasions to try and have her name stricken from the record, so that way they stop coming to our door on a regular basis. And we on numerous occasions when we were in the apartment in Boise had people from the local ward come by. They're like, hey, yeah, we're looking for Haley. We understand that she's in the neighborhood. And I was like, yeah, I don't know how you got our address. Please stop coming here. We'd appreciate that. And they would, not come back for 6 months, and then they'd come back, and then they'd not come back for 6 months, and they'd come back. So we moved out to Meridian back in July. And this last weekend, we see somebody pull up into the sidewalk in front of the house, and we're playing a tabletop game in the kitchen. And Haley's like, "Are you expecting someone over?" "No, I have no idea who it is." And this really nice woman who's probably mid 40s, early 50s, she walks up and knocks on the door, and she's like, "Hi, I'm coming from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we heard that Haley just recently moved here." And I'm like, "Oh no, I don't know how to be nice, and you're on my doorstep. Oh no." And Haley's on the in the kitchen like, "Don't be mean. Don't be mean." And I was like, "Okay, I understand what you're doing. There's a bunch of no soliciting signs in the neighborhood. And also, you walked by my car, whose license plate is Satan, to come to my doorstep to have this conversation. Please recognize that we don't want to have this conversation, but we've tried to make this to stop happening multiple times." So the lady tells me the same thing that I've heard a couple of times. She's like, "Well, it's your responsibility to reach out to the church to make it so that way the name is stricken from the record." I was like, "Lady, you are a representative of the church that the church has sent to my doorstep. This is me reaching out to the church. I don't need to go to your doorstep to say, stop coming to mine." So, yeah, that was my first experience with the lady missionary.
But this because that's very different. That sounds like that's a
That was
representative
a
from the
welcoming
local
committee. Yeah,
ward.
that was
That's
very
very.
different. And she unfortunately got the tail end of years of frustration with me.
But that missionary experience has been a very very common experience that Mormon men have.
That's one of the most interesting times. Brad and Daniel and I went on a road trip to Salt Lake. I think this is like around 2006 or 2007. And Brad was friends with Travis from Gym Class Heroes, and we were going down for a Gym Class Heroes show. And while we're down there, the concert was on a Saturday, and we're coming back on Sunday. And I just said, "Hey, I'm really interested in architecture. I want to go check out Temple Square before we leave." And the closer and closer we get to Temple Square, the more we notice everybody is just dressed to the nines, and they are just on their A game so much more than when we ever got ready for church. Like, we always had that, God accepts you for who you are. You don't need to dress up for church. And we're going to go to the beach afterwards. You might as well just be in an aloha shirt. So we're getting there, and we're seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of Mormons. And it turns out that the same weekend that we had gone there for this concert was the general conference. So the president and the prophet of the Mormon church was speaking, and it's this like, pilgrimage to Mecca for the Mormons, all going to Salt Lake. And Westboro Baptist Church was at the front, like the North Gate temple entrance, protesting the Mormons. And Brad and I did the things that Brad and I do, and Daniel is the good one of the three of us who's like, "No, I'm going to go talk to them in love and change their opinions." And Brad and I were just like, "We're going to be assholes because they're being assholes." Uh, so we were assholes for like an hour, and we're just making this huge, huge commotion in front of hundreds of missionaries who have traveled from all over the world to see the president and prophet speak. And I'm just holding up like stupid signs like, "Peanut butter and jelly is the way that God wanted it to be. Peanut butter and honey is an abomination."
Yeah, there's those guys can, man, they can ruin a 4th of July parade, man. It's
They
they
can
can
ruin a
ruin it.
couple of things. I have never celebrated anyone's death the way that I celebrated Robert Phelps' death. And I remember posting on social media, the world is better because it is 200 pounds lighter of assholes.
Yeah, there's I've been kind of dealing with that a little bit this past week because the Pope has been very ill.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many people are just like they're because a lot of conservative Catholics are like he's the woke Pope, and they're just waiting for another Pope to come in. So
We'll have to talk about this next week because this is
yeah,
a
yeah, we'll
whole
have to do this.
conversation.
Yeah, yeah,
But I
because we could
think
talk about
that,
this for a long time.
well, I was telling Haley, I think that it is, if you'll probably have more of a view of it than I do, looking at Catholicism as this very ancient organization. And if this is an organization that is actually communing with whatever the thing upstairs is, I find it very interesting. Circling back to the thing that we said earlier, populism is a train that's moving and it is here. And the timing of this Pope's illness, in conjunction with how the Catholic Church is going to be moving into this new world stage, that is a really, really curious timed event. And that's all the observation that I'll make on it. And we can talk about it more in another episode.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about it another time because I mean I do have a lot of opinions on it, and so we'll just have to talk about it on another time.
Yeah, yeah. I guess we'll end on some happy notes. And anything else that you want to say to the viewers and listeners before we go out for the week?
Uh, hey, if you know anybody who's a federal employee and they need work, put them in your network list. There's going to be a lot of it's a big reduction in force, so there's going to be people out of work all over the country, and help them out if you can.
Yeah, it's there are a lot of people who are going to be really, really struggling over the next 6 months. So definitely ask your friends how they're doing. Make sure that you're a support structure if you can be for them, because people will be very, very, very much in need of that. So I appreciate you guys for listening to us once again. If you haven't already, you can follow us on Spotify, YouTube, and Amazon Music. If you can leave us a review, that really, really helps us grow the show. And we just want to be able to get more good dinner conversations out with everybody else. So from us over here at the Supper Talk Podcast, thank you so much. And you guys have a great week.
Take care, y'all.